Hi. If you're tuning in live, welcome. My name is Cheryl. I use they, them pronouns. And today's call is all about me sharing how I actually went from the person who used to hide, like 2020, used to hide in my house with all the curtains closed, under a dark blanket, not wanting to be alive, but also not wanting to die, but hoping that maybe I wouldn't wake up so that I didn't have to make a choice kind of deal um, to the person who flies across Canada and teaches world-class leaders and authentically and unapologetically shows up online and in life as a messy work in progress, while also knowing my true value, my true worth, and that I'm here to change the world and to get things done through telling my story, through doing what only I can do, and through allowing myself to go first, bushwhack, as it were, and learn the lessons and translate them in real time to the people coming behind me so that they don't have to take as long and make as many mistakes. So that's what today's call is about. If you're watching the replay on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. I would love to know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Also, I'm getting super distracted by my beautiful gray streak. My grandmother, who crossed over when I was 18 years old, told me that my wisdom would arrive when my gray hair came in. And she's not wrong. And I say she in the present tense because I feel her with me quite frequently in current life. So in order to fully appreciate how far I've come, I'm going to need you to realize where I started. So please note that I am not giving content or trigger warnings for this talk. I understand that they're really important to folks. I understand their purpose and their functionality. I also have learned that trauma and content warnings allowed me to continue to avoid facing my trauma patterns and the things that scared me, which increased the anxiety and it increased the resistance and it made me feel worse and bad and even more wrong. So if something comes up for you and you feel that you're getting activated, invitation to pause the video, leave entirely, invitation to reset your nervous system, go outside, have a hot tea or a coffee or a fizzy drink, something that can really connect you into the present moment through smell, through taste, through touch, through sensation. Maybe you want to put your hands like this and start tapping either side of your collarbone so that you're activating both sides of your nervous system, and breathe in slowly through your nose and hold it for a second at the top and then exhale as though you're blowing through a straw. Because when we get control of our breathing and when we can stay present in our body, we teach our nervous system that we're the ones in control of our safety and not the circumstances around us. Because the nervous system, even though evolution and technology and self-awareness and all these things have increased at a rapid rate, the nervous system is still an ancient technology that has not quite discovered the nuance between the difference of a past memory that freaks you out and getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger who's going to eat you and your babies, okay? You will find that I often deliver really tough things with humor, and it's not because I'm trying to make light of it. It's just part of who I am and how I diffuse the intensity through something that's a common experience. Okay, so the too long didn't read version of my life goes as follows. I was born in 1986, almost 8 weeks early, almost 8 weeks premature, and I was an identical twin baby. And I was born to parents who had been through their own traumas. My mom was 18 at the time, and I already had an 18-month older brother. And my father was in his 20s. Now, I don't know a lot about their truth. I only know what I saw in pictures and what my mother told me, and she's an unreliable narrator. And then what I learned later in life when my estranged father reached out to me on social media. So I come from a family of substance use disorder, of sexual abuse, of trauma, of children being removed from the home when their parents chose their substances over their children. I come from a family that has incest, including in my own home, but not to me or my brother, at least not sexually. Emotional incest is its own thing, and it's really common in homes where one or more of the adults has experienced abuse as children. The emotional closeness and all of that, treating you like a partner instead of a child, those kinds of things, treating you like their confidant and their best friend instead of the child they're supposed to care for and nurture and protect. Those kinds of things. I'm getting jealous of you when you have a significant other or a best friend or any of those kinds of things. That's a hint at those. And I would invite you, if you're unfamiliar with those, not to get your information from the Google AI summary or ChatGPT, because those are language learning models. They're not actually fact checked. I would instead invite you to go to your local library, find a podcast, find some books, and look up things like boundaries, emotional incest, and enmeshment and attachment wounds and all of those kinds of things. And you might find you learn a lot about your parents and why things are hard for you, and why you're like, why can't we just talk about how to make pizza? Why does it always have to be so weird, so dramatic, right? Yeah. Okay, so my sister died of sudden infant death syndrome when I was about 3 months old. I don't know how old I was. All I know is that in the photos, in the family photo album that I used to look through every single day, because nobody ever talked about it, except to remind me that, Cheryl, when you were born, you were a twin and then your sister died. Other than that, I didn't know. Nobody talked about it. Nobody helped my brother or I process it, and nobody helped my mother or my father process it either. So my sister died when I was about 3 months old, and I know this from the photo album because there's a point where there's lots of photos of all of us, of my mom, my dad, all their friends. There's beer bottles everywhere. There's ashtrays everywhere. It's the 80s. Nobody cares about drinking and smoking around babies. Come on. And then suddenly there's hardly any photos. And then the photos are mostly just of milestones. There'll be like a photo of me on my birthday in front of a cake, or there would be a photo of me and my brother outside of someone's house when we're on a trip. But somewhere between when my sister died and when I turned 13, people stopped keeping records. It's almost as if it was too painful to be reminded of the one that was lost. And this echoed through my entire life. I learned at a very young age that it was bad that I was the only one who survived. And I internalized that, and I felt guilty for existing. I internalized every piece of grief that my mother had as something that was wrong with me. And I can look back now as an adult and make that determination, but it took a lot of therapy after 5 years of going no contact with her for me to realize that so much of my identity was wrapped up in her inability to talk about her grief and her inability to be present for the 2 children that she had. And that is not a judgmental statement. That is not a blaming statement. That is, my mom was so hurt and so wounded because of her own stuff that I won't disclose here, but I will disclose some of it in the book that I'm writing on, the things I got from my mother. It's her story, and it's up to her whether or not she wants to tell it. I'm only going to share the parts that impacted me in a real way and that I had to face and deal with. And so growing up was really difficult because my parents split up shortly after I hit about age 2. And it's unclear as to what the real reason was, but my mom kind of sort of blames it on my father's alcoholism and how he chose that over us. But like I said, she's an unreliable narrator. I've caught her in multiple lies about my own life, and things that I was actually there for that she had explained to me one way, and then later when I'm an adult, she would just casually say it was something completely different. And my whole reality again would get pulled out from under me, and I'd have to reconfigure everything I thought I knew about myself. And like it happened over and over and over again. So thinking about this growing up, my mom told us, sort of alluded to, that my father chose his alcohol over us. And not only do I feel like that's not quite accurate, it's hypocritical because my mother was not clean and sober. No matter how much she thinks she hid it from us, she was absolutely not clean and sober. And we were put in so many dangerous situations. We were put in situations with child predators. We were put in situations with without being supervised. We were put in situations where we were made to care for and fend for ourselves before we were old enough to have any inkling of that kind of responsibility. I remember being 12 years old, before cell phones fully existed. We had like an analog cell phone with a dial on the side and a really long antenna, and it had like a green screen and stuff. And I had that, my mom let me take it so that I could go from Mission City in British Columbia. There's a train called the West Coast Express. And I used to hop on that in the morning at like 7 a.m. and ride it all by myself to downtown Vancouver. Then I would either get on a bus or walk up the hill to my orthodontist, because we used to live in Vancouver and we moved after my mom had another rupture with another boyfriend. We ended up moving into Mission. And I was going back to my orthodontist at 12 years old. And then I would go there and I would have that appointment. And then sometimes I would go to one of her friends' houses, which was also really weird. Like I would have to take the bus there and get there myself at 12 in a city that was not mine, in a city with like over 1 million people. When there was no social media, there were no cell phones, there was nobody who could take a picture of me if I was going missing. Like there was nothing like that. And then I would go and I would wait until it was time for the train to come home. And then I would go home. And that was normal for me. It was normal for me to go to doctor's appointments without my mother. It was normal for me to advocate for myself in school. It was normal for me to feed myself, to clothe myself, to do my own laundry, to take care of the pets. Because if I didn't, I would be punished emotionally, and mostly, and then like through silence and withholding. So I learned very quickly to be so observant, to anticipate every possible need that could possibly happen so that I wouldn't lose proximity to sort of being connected to somebody. One thing I will say though, is my mother was very, very good at taking care of me when I was genuinely ill. Most of my positive memories of her are of her taking care of me when I'm sick. And still to this day, when I'm feeling really sick, I just really want my mom. And that's a really hard thing to break. And maybe one day things will change and we'll reconcile. But as it sits right now, it's not safe for either one of us to be in a relationship with each other. There's too much trauma bonding, too much enmeshment, too much blame and shame, and a lack of honesty and integrity about what went down. And to this day, I've never received like a meaningful apology. It's just, I'm so sorry for all of the things that you experienced. Like, that's not an apology. That's not. You know what you did. I know what I did. When we wrong someone, we might not know why it impacted them the way that it did, but we know what we did. So like that set me up to anticipate the needs of everyone else over my own, and to not really have a sense of identity beyond being the answer to everyone's problems. Now, also, I didn't know until the pandemic, after a huge identity crash, after going no contact with my mom, being totally isolated at home alone with me and my wife, and all of the hiding that I did and being useful and socializing and being super open and meaningful in those connections, and being like the Mary Poppins. I could do anything. People call me when they're in a pinch, whether it's for theater, whether it's for personal stuff, whether it's for professional stuff, whether it's for house sitting, for manuscript editing, for whatever. I was the person you would call, and I would drop everything and I would show up every single time. And then I would just do literally every gap that I saw. until it was over. And then I would go home and I would burn out for weeks and no one would question it because I never showed that side. Because having needs is weak. Because having needs means you're being selfish. Because having needs means you're being ungrateful. And then you get punished. You get punished by losing access to the people that you care about. You get punished from losing privileges. There's a section in my book where I rank the top 10 punishments from my mother and agree to disagree when you eventually get there and read them. But the number one worst punishment for me was on my birthday when everybody else got to celebrate my birthday and I didn't because I was grounded and I was like 8 years old. They had cupcakes. They watched the movie that I wanted to watch. I got to come to the table and have dinner and they sang happy birthday and they blew out the candles for my cupcakes. And then there wasn't one for me and I was sent back to my room. And that's the kind of home I grew up in. And that was the worst to me, but it was probably the gentlest one of all of them. But because of who I am, because of my big-hearted Leo-ness, because the only thing I've ever wanted in my entire life is to be unconditionally loved and accepted, that core wounding of you made a mistake, now you get nothing, was really hard for me. And just this last 2 weeks ago, I had that activated again. There was an assumption made about something that I posted on the internet, and I understand where the assumption came from. And the relationship was completely revoked, even though I replied within 2 hours saying that wasn't the case. I understand why you think it might be. I apologize for the impact on you. And then crickets. And so it triggered this core wounding in me. And when I say core wounding, I mean like my entire root lock, all of the muscles inside of my pelvic floor locked. And I wasn't even able to go to the bathroom for over 10 days, even though I was walking every day, even though I was taking fiber and laxatives and doing massage and having hot baths and doing yoga and like drinking tons of water and then going on a 3-day juice cleanse, because the body braces based on what it remembers. And my body remembered having my source of safety and identity ripped away from me. And the echoes of that came back up in this moment. And it was after I processed that just a week ago that I realized the thing that made me have the identity shift from growing up the way that I grew up and being unsupported and judged and things always changing and chaos and going to 25 schools in 12 years and doing my grade 4 in 5 different schools because every time my mom couldn't pay the rent, we would just up and move over and over and over and over again. Every time she got a new boyfriend and we were in a new house, it felt like. And so I never learned stability. I never learned consistency. I never learned how to handle conflict because in my home, the only conflict there was is she's right and you're wrong, the end, forever. And so in my adulthood, I started seeking out relationships that were sort of like that, but nicer. People who seemed to know what was going on in the world, whether or not I even agreed with them, didn't matter because I didn't know anything. I only knew about my childhood bully, which was my mother. And as I got older, every time I saw myself in the mirror, I saw her. And that was my biggest fear. I didn't want to be like her. And it was through the last 5 years of doing deep somatic nervous system work, of doing deep reflective journaling, of going to therapy. For 2 years, I went to therapy every single week for 90 minutes per session. And we went through the things and we talked about identity and we talked about beliefs and we talked about nervous system safety. And I learned how to create safety in my body and rewrite long-held beliefs into what's more workable, what has more integrity, what has more truth. And the identity that I stepped into this year was something that I had been molding for the last 5, because first I had to deconstruct everything that I thought was who I was and make an identity with what was left. And my biggest fear was that once I pull all my trauma off, once I pull all my coping skills off, once I pull off all of the labels that everyone else has given me, like amazing, like incredible, like indispensable, like judgmental, like cold, like sarcastic, like distant, like moody, dramatic, creative, whatever they all are, whatever all the labels that anyone has ever given me, when I stripped them all away and it was just me left, would that be enough? And for a while, I didn't think it was. So I hid for a very long time. And I tried on everyone else's identities. And I think I got to do what most people do when they're in between like age 6 and age 14. And they're trying on all these different ways of being. And they're trying to be an astronaut. And they're trying to be a scientist. And they're trying to be a pop icon. And they're trying to be a hockey player. And they're exploring themselves through books and through art and through music. And I didn't get to do that until I was 33 years old, because I was just trying to stay alive however I could. And because I was so vulnerable, I got sucked into a cult. While I was trying to run away from my mother, there was a evangelical Christian fringe Pentecostal church cult that just sucked me right up. They love a good rags to religious transformation story. So I experienced a loss, and the only reference I had for it was Jesus, Christianity, because that was the only thing that was being given to me. And so I went to church and I went to Bible college and tried to figure out who this God was and if I even wanted to be like him or learn from him or follow him. And then when I was there, suddenly all these people loved me. I was indispensable to them. They praised my gifts. They loved that I could just speak truth. And they said it was the gift of prophecy. And I was turned into a pastor and a worship singer. And I was part of a band and I led a prison ministry. And I was a published author and I was well respected. Then I became a missionary candidate and I raised tens of thousands of dollars from stages in tiny churches all over Canada sharing my story. When I went to missionary school, I flamed out hard and I got fired for being mentally ill. And I was only mentally ill because I didn't know who I was. And they kept asking me, why are you trying to prove yourself? Why are you trying to prove yourself? Why are you trying to prove yourself? And I was so confused. I didn't know what they meant. I was like, I'm not trying to do anything. This is just how I am. This is why you picked me. Because I maximize everyone's potential. Except that's not why they picked me. They picked me because I was easy to manipulate. And when my identity started fragmenting and I started questioning things and I started honoring myself and I started seeing the incongruence and falling apart completely, they knew that I was a liability for what they had in mind. And so I was sent home. I was given 1 month severance and they kept all the other money and I was completely abandoned. So I had to go back to my hometown, back to the least safe place for me. And thankfully, there was a family there who took me in for a while. And they fed me and they clothed me. Like I couldn't cook for myself. I couldn't do anything. I didn't have any belongings aside from a couple of things in my suitcase. And about a year later, after some massive conflict with my mother and some people in the church, I called up some friends who were moving to Vancouver Island. And I said, when are you leaving? And they said, in 2 weeks. And I said, can I come? And they said, yes. And I sold every last thing that I had. And I got on a plane with a guitar, a backpack, and a suitcase. And I moved down to Vancouver Island. And that was 2014. That was the winter of 2014. And then in 2015, I spent a long time trying to find a job and a place to live because once again, I wasn't the person that they thought I was. I crumpled under pressure. Hello, I was deeply traumatized and deeply depressed and undiagnosed autistic, had been rejected by my family and my church and had nobody looking out for me. And they were upset with how I was handling that. And in hindsight, I can see how ridiculously off base and unhelpful they were. But in the moment, I felt again like I had failed. I felt again like I was a problem, a burden, and nobody cared about me and nobody loved me. And I had that identity reinforced that you're broken, that you're messed up, that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you're just going to disappoint people and they're going to reject you and they're going to leave. Over and over and over and over again, this kept happening. So while I was working for a cable company call center, and I will never, ever work for a call center ever again. Dear Cheryl, you hate answering your own phone. Why did you take a job answering phones? Well, it was the only job I could get, and it had health and dental benefits, and I had never had those. So I went and I did it enthusiastically for 6 months, and then I lost 2 people in my family. One of them was the uncle that my mom had a romantic relationship with. Yes, you heard that right. Her uncle died, but she had also had a live-in relationship with him when I was a teenager. And that caused a weird grief, trauma, storm response in me. And I resigned from my job just before the 6 months probation period was over. And I applied for a student loan to go back to university. My previous degree was in biblical studies and religious education, and I wanted to be a counselor. I wanted to help people like me. Even though I was so messy and so broken, I still thought if I can tell my story, if I can help people, if I can turn everything that I've learned into something wonderful, maybe that's the point of life. And I wasn't quite off base, but it was not the right execution, but that's okay. So I went to university, I got accepted, and I got like a really, really cheap basement suite that was super duper moldy at the bottom of the hill by the university that I went to. And that same year that I started school, I met my wife while volunteering for drag bingo at a local cafe. And we were just friends for about a year before it became clear to me that I loved her. And then I drunk texted her, and that is another story for another time. I'm since 3 years sober, so good job for her for sticking around to see that I'm not as messed up as I was at first. But yeah, it was quite the journey. So I was at university, and that first year when I was taking social work and I was taking psychology classes, and even though I'm like an insane academic, like school is easy for me, I couldn't pass the tests because I didn't agree with the frameworks. And when I don't agree with something, I can't just regurgitate it rote memory. So then I had to pivot. I was like, okay, so there's more than one way to help people. I'm going to take writing. I'm going to switch to a creative writing degree because I'm an excellent writer. I'm really good with words. I can write really, really fast. And I know that more people will be helped by a $25 book than will be helped by, a $2,500 therapy fee. So that's what I went to school for. And then we graduated in 2019, and shortly thereafter, the pandemic happened. But I also went no contact with my mom in 2019. She came to my graduation and was stoned the entire time she was with us. She was more worried and concerned about seeing all of my other family than she was about spending time with me and Olivia. I witnessed firsthand her treat my then partner, now spouse, the way that she had treated me my whole life. As soon as Olivia was out of earshot, my mom would just say shitty, negative, undercutting things about her, and every other thing out of her mouth was a judgment or racist or defeatist I came parallel to like, I don't want this in my life anymore. So when Liv and I dropped her off at 5 a.m. at the airport, the day after Pride that we ended up missing because my mom mysteriously got a headache at 5 p.m. And so we weren't just going to go out and leave her in her house. I didn't trust her to leave her in my house unsupervised. So she went to bed at like 5 or 6 p.m. and we didn't see her until the morning when it was time to go. And after we dropped her off and she got off and she got onto the plane, I turned and looked at Liv in the car and I said, I am never having another event in my life be about her. Ever. I put myself through school. I graduated with honors. This should have been the happiest week of my life so far. And I hated it. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I didn't get any photos with my friends. I was so scared. And I just felt completely unsafe, unsupported, and unloved. And after that, I went into a deep, dark depression for about 8 months. When I started to come out of the depression, Canada was just getting ready for the lockdown for COVID-19. And prior to that, I was in school full time, volunteering full time, working part time. I had every minute of every day was super busy and I hardly slept and I was smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol and just out all the time, but I was still pulling straight A's. I was still winning bonuses at work. And in my last year of school, I was starting to reach my breaking point and I had to be unemployed for my final year of university, but I still did really well in school. I was an editor on the student newspaper. I was a representative in student government. And yet I didn't want to be alive because what's the point? What's the point of all these accolades? What's the point of being great at everything if the person who's supposed to love you the most hates you? That's how I felt. I still felt not good enough. I still felt like no matter what I did and what I achieved, I would never actually be loved, even though I had my wife. Even though I had my partner at that time. We didn't get married until during the pandemic, but I still felt so broken and like it didn't matter to anyone. Like if I were to disappear, people would be sad for a minute and then they'd all move on. There would be nobody who would be devastated that I was gone. And I believed that for so long. But during the pandemic, I couldn't run away from my feelings. I couldn't work and be busy and be the achiever and rack up all of these accolades to prove that I wasn't a piece of shit. So what do I do then? Well, I went back to fixing the outside before you fix the inside because that's easier, right? So I signed up for Beachbody. You may have heard it. And I opted in as a coach so that I could get a discount on the products. I didn't intend to make a business out of it. I didn't intend to coach. And then I started having results really quickly. I started an Instagram account. This is the same one that I use for coaching now, the Cheryl Folland. It started out as like Cheryl Gets Fit or something. I can't remember. But I started posting my journey and my transformation and sharing my stories and sharing what was coming up for me and sharing like the body changing and like all the things. And I started getting confidence. I started learning in my body first what I was about to learn in my spirit and in my identity. And it was that if you can hold on through the wobble and be your own source of safety and confidence, you will come out the other side more coherent and more integrated and stronger and believe in yourself more. And I learned that by losing 127 pounds during over 2 years during the pandemic. But at the same time, the person who was 2 levels upline in me, the way it was like, it was an MLM, let's be honest, it was network marketing. The person 2 levels above me had just dissolved her side of the business and switched her thing to spiritual entrepreneurial business coaching. And I had heard her story and I knew what she was that she was enough like me from her story. And I could see that her joy was authentic and I wanted it. So I joined her 40-day Kundalini challenge and I begrudgingly put my hands together like this, saying HUD, HUD, HUD every day for 11 minutes. And then the whole time I was like, this is stupid. There's no way this is going to work. You know, I've been through religion. I've been through spirituality. I've been through prayer. I've been through exercise. I've gone to therapy. I've done all of these things. I've distanced myself from the abusive people in my life and I still hate everything about me. How is this going to be any different? And then on day 11, it started to shift. So I stayed with it. I stayed with this coach. I'm still with this coach. I stayed with this mentor. I stayed with the practice. And eventually I became certified in it because I wanted to know the science behind why it worked, not just that it did. And then I learned about nervous system and meridian mapping and somatics and the connection between the breath and the energetics and the chakras and the 5 Chinese element theory and like all of these things. And then when I layered that over top of my experience with religion and over top of my experience with medical models and the way that my autistic brain works, where it just remembers random knowledge, like I just photocopied it. And I could see how everything was the same. And I could finally understand how the trauma that was stored in my body was causing me to be in my not self. It was causing me to see myself through a garbled lens. It was causing me to identify with my pain and my trauma as fundamentally part of who I am instead of things that happened to me or near me. And it gave me the tools to be able to find safety, to learn how to bring my nervous system back to neutral or close to so that I could deal with things, so that I could process things, so that I could let things go. And so I could choose differently. And so what looks like an immediate identity shift actually was a 5, almost 6-year process that was rooted in choosing myself first 4 years before. If I hadn't have gotten on that plane, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that. I trusted my gut enough to get out, to get as far away as I humanly could and go from there. And that proof is all I need every time something feels unfamiliar and I need to go. So when this year happened and my wife got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition and my whole identity, I realized, was wrapped up in being her partner and being loved by the one person who ever truly unconditionally loved me in my life that I'm aware of, that felt threatened. And I immediately, my core wounds were activated and I shut everyone out. I left 158 Facebook groups. I left the coaching container that I had paid $11,000 to be in. I did send her a message first and said, hey, I'm pulling back. Please know it's not you. I'm going through a lot right now. And I really do need space and time to process this and know what's up. And even though we had conversations since then where she said it was like really hard to do that, I'm really grateful that she like listened to that, because nobody except for my wife had ever believed my boundaries and listened to them. And this person did. And even though part of me was like, well, why aren't they coming and rescuing me? And it's like, because you asked them not to. So now you have to do it yourself. And so I leaned into it. I leaned into the work. I did it myself. I did it away from prying eyes. I didn't post it on the internet. And I lost a lot of friends and connections because all of those relationships were built on me being the one, showing up to all the things, chasing, inviting, helping, supporting, giving advice, being the free therapist. And as soon as I stopped holding all of those and giving it all away for free and gave it all to myself first, things started to shift. In 2008, oh my God, on September 8th, I shut down my sole proprietorship and incorporated Sensory Balance Space Inc. because I had decided that I was going to leave coaching behind forever, and go into making neuro-inclusive and nervous system support spaces at live events, and that I was going to train people how to do that, and that we were going to grow across Canada, and I'm still doing that. But then something else happened at the same time. The identity that I was required to hold in order to do that, in order to be the owner and founder of a corporation, in order to be able to pitch to boards, I had to have an identity up level. And in order to do that, I had to release loyalty to who I had always been and the stories that had always been true for me. Because the person who thinks that everyone is out to get them, that nobody loves them, that they can't be trusted, that love is conditional, that opportunities are like something that someone's gonna bait and switch with you, that you can't ever trust yourself or anyone else, that person can't do what I knew I was being called to do. So I started acting as though I was already successful, as though I had already hit my first $100,000 year, as though I had already been booked out completely solid, as though I was the go-to person for this. I stopped worrying about who was going to see my content and what they were going to think about it. And I went. And then I got a high-end, high-quality branding photo shoot. I got a whole marketing plan for a whole year. And I just started showing up differently. There was no explanation. There was no transition. I just literally went from frumpy, whiny baby in their pajamas who doesn't shower to badass CEO. And everyone started messaging me, including the people who had completely bailed. And while, yeah, they did completely bail, I also held them at a really far distance. One, because of my conditioning, but two, because I felt the same way in my body when I was around them as I did when I was around my mother, and I had ignored it for so long. And I don't anymore. I believe myself now. That's the difference. Not only do I believe in myself, but I believe myself. Because I had to deconstruct, get really fucking honest, and become myself again, where I alone am the authority of what is right and true for me. And that was really hard, and it still is really hard. A lot of feathers are ruffled. In some ways, rightfully so, because even though I wasn't intending to, and even though I didn't mean it, and even though I wasn't even consciously aware, I was lying and pretending to be someone I wasn't for 35 years of my life. And it took 4 years to completely disentangle from that pattern. And I can't control the assumptions that people make about that. I can't control how they feel, how they respond, what they're going to do with it. All I can do is control what I do and how I show up. So you won't catch me with other people's names in my mouth. You won't catch me blaming people. You won't catch me pretending like the choices I made didn't hurt anyone. I know they did. I also know they were the only choice I could make for myself at the time. So while I'm not going to apologize for what I did and didn't do, I am very remorseful for the impact that my lack of safety in self and integrity to be who I authentically am caused in the lives of other people. But you only know what you know when you know it. And I have learned after being a slave and a prisoner to shame that wasn't even mine for so long that shame isn't necessary. It isn't even necessary. It has no place in my life. So, what looks like an overnight identity shift was actually me finally stepping into who I knew I was a couple of years ago. But I was scared about what it would cost me to take that on. And it wasn't until the person I love most in the whole world might have been taken away from me that I got brave enough and sick enough of my own shit to step into who I needed to be, because she's the main breadwinner for our home. Because I've been through some fucking shit and it messes me up. I have chronic pain. I'm slowly leaving the morbidly obese category. I will continue to get healthier day by day by day. But I stored my trauma on the outside of my body in a big protective fat suit, because if I was morbidly obese and ugly and dirty and disheveled, then I wouldn't be a target for some of the abuses that I had previously experienced. It was all unconscious until it wasn't, until I was still choosing it, even though I had already been made aware. Then on December 13th in 2023, 2022, I'm weird with time, whatever, 3 years ago on December 13th, I decided to get sober. And I realized very quickly that no one else cared. They pretended to care. They would give lip service, but they would still invite me to all of their events where alcohol was central and everyone was wasted. And I was supposed to mind my own relationship with alcohol. Well, for me, the boundary is to just not be around it. but that meant that I couldn't be around any of those people. And so for 18 months, I tried. And for 18 months, I felt like I was betraying myself, like I was an outsider, like I was unsafe, like everyone was judging me. But really, I was judging me for being somewhere I knew I shouldn't be. And the more I leaned into the process of sobriety, so I did sobriety without AA, without anything like that, because I'd been in a cult before and it just doesn't feel good to me. But I did sobriety on my own with my tools, with my nervous system tools, with my coach, with journaling, with the support of my wife. And it was really fucking hard. And it still is, and it's not. Both things are true at the same time. You get to be a contradiction. But um people cared more about being able to be drunk at a social gathering than they did about my safety. They just did. It's not a judgment. It's literally what happened. I get invited to these events and they're all at bars, or I'll get invited to dinners or cookouts or parties or whatever, and everyone's drunk or drinking or using or whatever. And it is just, I don't physically feel safe around drunk people because of my upbringing. And I also had my first drink that I remember when I was 4 years old, and all the adults thought it was funny. So, in order to radically honor my own truth, I had to be willing to leave behind the people who had been my source of safety and social support for the better part of a decade without making them wrong for who and how they are. And I did it imperfectly because I didn't know how to have the conversation without judgment, without them feeling bad. So instead of having open and direct conversations with the people I cared about my boundary, about my struggle, about where I was going, about what I was doing, I didn't say anything because I cared more about their emotional reaction, their perceived judgment coming from me, or the one that they would give back to me for being too sensitive, for just should just be able to get over it, or whether they perceived I had judgment against them or whatever. I was too scared to face that, so I avoided it, which was not good. And stepping into a more powerful spotlight brought a lot of those conversations up. And I'm still having them. But what I want to share with you is that the shift that you've noticed online, or that if you go back and you look at my old social media, if you scroll down and you look at how I was, and then you look at the last, well, it's January 2nd at the time of recording this, and you look at the last 5 months, you can see a noticeable difference. Where before I wasn't clear, I was saying some nice things, I was a little bit inspiring, but I wasn't authoritative. I wasn't asking for sales in my business. I wasn't sharing anything that could potentially be triggering or polarizing to anyone ever. And because of that, I kept having the same patterns of relationships show up with my clients. It was so toxic and so bad, and led me to dissolve my coaching business. But once I stepped into this new identity, the one that I really was underneath all of this other stuff, it was almost as like, when you're really, really cold and then you put on the exact right jacket and you're totally fine and you can stay outside for hours. That's what it was like. It was like I literally put on this identity, and then suddenly all that other stuff didn't bother me. And then it clicked. I get to choose who I am every single day. And so now I am coaching again, but I'm coaching in identity and self-ownership using the modalities that helped me. After getting trained both at the practitioner level and then the master level in Trifecta Alchemy certification, which is monitored by a third party for integrity and for like universal blah, 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 ethics, blah, blah. If you want to know, you can send me a message. I'll get you the info. But like what I learned was like 500 plus hours of teaching and practicum and learning, plus 6 years of hands-on experience and integration. And I came from some shit, y'all. I don't think there's anything that shocks me anymore except for unabashed kindness. But I no longer perceive myself as unlovable. I no longer perceive myself as a fuck up. I no longer perceive myself as someone who has to earn the right to be loved and accepted. I now have a threshold, a base threshold of access to me through friendship, where if your first impulse is to think the absolute worst of me, you don't get to be my close friend anymore. If that's where you're at in your healing journey because of my background and my wounds and my triggers, I have to protect myself so that I don't reactivate any residue that's left there. Which means that in order to be in close proximity with me, in relationship with me, you have to have the bare minimum that before you make snap judgments about someone, including me, including yourself, you first pause and you get curious and you ask questions to understand what happened instead of making reactive, sweeping judgments and operating out of a place of fear and suspicion and treachery and betrayal. Because I can honestly say that aside from when I was a kid and my brother and I used to beat the shit out of each other, for lack of a better term. We're like 18 months apart, and our mom didn't really raise us with gender roles. Probably because she was just too busy being stoned, but I digress. That joke was a little dark. But she like didn't enforce things. Like we were allowed to wrestle and play together, but my brother and I, we were pretty physically abusive to each other. Aside from that, I have never consciously, intentionally been mean to anyone ever. Anything that came out of me that was mean-spirited, that was rude, that was harsh, that was blaming, that was sarcastic, that was biting, that was undermining, came from a place of pain. That doesn't mean the impact wasn't real. That doesn't mean that people weren't hurt. I have never intentionally harmed anyone. And to my knowledge, anytime that I've been made aware of the harm, even though I may have responded verbally or textually from a cold, detached place, I spent hours crying on the kitchen floor. I would spend days or weeks or months, and my wife could attest to this if you ever ask her, just psychoanalyzing every single sentence I said or didn't say, of how it could have been taken that way and what I could have done differently, and I should have, would have, could have myself. And I don't do that anymore. I then shifted it to trying to understand why other people would be that way. And then that makes you equally as insane. Because even trying to understand why other people are like that all of the time, what it does to you is it's still you being hypervigilant. It's still you trying to take responsibility and micromanage everyone's problems and reactions and emotions and responses before they even have them. And you can't do that. You can't even do that when they are having them. We can only manage our own reactivity and our own emotional impact and our own choice and our own decisions. Unless you're looking after tiny humans or you're the caregiver of someone who's completely dependent on you, the only person you control in your life is you. So when I started to focus on that and tuned out everything else, things started to change. And they started to change rapidly. And 2026 is on a trajectory to change even more. So while this wasn't a clean, clear cut, here's how I stepped into a new identity in 5.8 seconds, it gives you an idea that this is not an instant process. You can condense it. You can collapse time through devotion, through energetics, through nervous system reprogramming, through trauma recovery therapy, through somatics, through testing and expanding your window of tolerance. but it takes time. And too many people want a vending machine. Too many people want to put their trauma in the vending machine and have a shiny, happy new life and identity come out. And that's not how it works. It is messy, it is clunky, and it is a lifelong process. And I'm sure 2, 3, 5 years from now, I'm going to be stepping into a whole nother other identity level. And everyone's going to be like, oh my God, how do you do it? I'm like, exactly the same way I did in that video that I posted on January 2nd. By trusting myself, by believing my body, and through discernment, devotion, and diligence to being the best possible version of me that I can be day by day without focusing on the problems. I focus on the solutions. I focus on who I want to be. I focus on how I want to do it differently. I pause in the middle of a traumatic outburst all the time and say, nope, I don't do that anymore. I need a minute. I need to take a break. I need to go for a walk. I need to have some weed. I need to do something to bring this down just a little so that I can look at it instead of run from it. I need to bring this down just a little so that I can hear you instead of be scared of you. I need to bring this down just a little so I can remember the last time I felt like this and what this is really about. And so my wife and I have been reparenting ourselves and each other through this radical sacred safety, where when we see the other person is getting activated instead of just irritated, we disengage and we ask them how we're doing and we care for them. We're like, do we need to stop talking about this? Do you need to sit down? Do you need a drink of water? Do you want to take a breath? Should we go for a walk? Do you need a bath? Do you need me to shut up? Should I leave? What do you need? And it's been so beautiful to see. And also, being in this room, the coach that I have and the folks that are in that room who love me unconditionally and see me in the muck when I'm snotty and teary and I haven't showered and I'm facing this stuff, and they celebrate me and they don't judge me and they don't care who my other friends are and whether I used the right word, and they're not psychoanalyzing every single thing I post on the internet. They just directly ask me if they even care. They put together a GoFundMe for me and Olivia this year, and the money that they raised for that GoFundMe, even though we didn't get the full $5,000 that the person who set it up asked for, we did get close to $3,000. I think we got around $2,500 actually, and that enabled us to buy groceries and to pay our mortgage and to buy Liv's prescriptions when everything was in flux and she wasn't able to be at work, and I had to be full-time caregiver while also dissolving one company and building another. And it's been a real journey. And I have learned that the people who you don't think are going to show up for you do, and the people who you think are going to show up for you don't. And nobody's wrong for that. Because I don't know, maybe all of the people who didn't show up for me had the exact same kind of year that I did with different details. I don't begrudge them. What I did learn is that I'm going to pour my energy into places that make me feel safe to exist as I am. And I hope that you'll be able to do the same as you go into this year, that you'll be able to hear the signals that your body's telling you and the whispers of who you could be if you would just let go of these weird patterns, and that you find your version of the catalyst to change that I did. Whether that's with me or not, doesn't matter. I want you to find your version of trusting yourself so much that it doesn't feel like the worst thing ever that people would be disappointed in you anymore. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. If you have any questions, if you would like me to go in deeper into any of these topics, please send me a DM on Instagram at the Cheryl Fallen. I look forward to connecting with you. And what else? It's January 2nd. In 8 days, I will be opening the container for my first ever 12-week program. It's called Finding Your Voice. It's a 12-week storytelling program for processing basically hard things at a distance through creative writing. There's biweekly somatics and Q&A. So once a month we'll get a somatic class, and once a month we'll get a hot seat coaching class. And every week I will drop a module that walks you through the process that I've used for the last 6 years to get me to where I am. I'm using creative writing prompts, and teaching about shame and identity in bite-sized chunks. Right now it's on pre-sale. You can find out that information in the story highlights on my Instagram profile, which will be linked below this video. And early bird will run for the month of January and be at $2,500. And then for February, it will be full price, which is around $5,000. If you would like to know more information about that, you can chat with me. I've got all the links in the bottom for how to connect, including my main website, where it's only $125 to work for a session, intentionally. I want the one-off sessions to be as accessible as possible while still paying me for all the work that I do on the back end. Thank you for being here today. I hope to connect with you. If you find this video and you follow me on Instagram at any time after this has been posted, please, please, please reach out and let me know a little bit about your story. I'd love to connect with you that way. Bye for now.